Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for the national anthem of the United States of America, the Star-Spangled Banner.
To honor America and perform our national anthem, please welcome Academy Award nominee and 6-time Grammy winner, Lady Gaga.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. Gave the roof through the night that our flag was still there. Whoa, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the
Wow. Well, good morning, St. Joseph class, and welcome to Road Trip USA. I'm just going to pop you there while I get set up for the next part of your time with me this morning. Welcome. So, welcome courtesy of Lady Gaga, singing at Super Bowl 50. Super Bowl is the most important, the biggest game of American football, which decides the champions of American football in the United States every year. And that was a special one because it was the 50th time the game had been played. It was actually played at a big stadium in California, which we'll find out is one of the most popular states of America. It's actually on the west coast, so it's nice and warm in California. But we'll think about states during another lesson and think about where different states are, and also state capitals and famous people from those states as well. But we're thinking first off more about the history of America. And you may remember I mentioned on Friday, when I told you about what we were going to be doing together, the book that our topic kind of encourages us to read, because it kind of encapsulates, it has a lot of themes and a lot of history that's connected with our topic, and because it talks about Native Americans. And as you remember, it's called The Indian in the Cupboard. So to get us kicked off properly, we've had the musical introduction from Lady Gaga, and I wanted to share chapter 1 with you. If you remember, it's called The Indian in the Cupboard. The Indian, or Red Indians, was an old name given to Native Americans. But in the 1960s, 1970s, it was kind of decided that it was a bit insulting. And so the phrase or the name was changed to Native Americans because they were native to the land of America. So it became more common usage to refer to Red Indians as Native Americans. But this book, I've discovered, was written in 1981, which to you guys seems like about 1 billion years ago. But I can tell you that I was 9, so I was some of you guys' age when this book first came out. The Indian in the Cupboard. In the first chapter, if you remember, Omri gets a birthday present, and the first chapter is called Birthday Presents. It was not that Omri didn't appreciate Patrick's birthday present to him. Far from it. He was really very grateful, sort of. It was, without a doubt, very kind of Patrick to give Omri anything at all, let alone a second-hand plastic red Indian, which he himself had finished with. The trouble was, though, that Omri was getting a little fed up with small plastic figures, of which he had loads. Biscuit tins full, probably 3 or 4 if they were all put away at the same time, which they never were, because most of the time they were scattered about in the bathroom, the loft, the kitchen, the breakfast room, not to mention Omri's bedroom and the garden. The compost heap was full of soldiers, which over several autumns had been raked up with the leaves by Omri's mother, who was rather careless about such things. Omri and Patrick had spent many hours together playing with their joint collections of plastic toys. But now they'd had enough of them, at least for the moment, and that was why when Patrick brought his present to school on Omri's birthday, Omri was disappointed. He tried not to show it, but he was. "Do you really like him?" asked Patrick as Omri stood silently with the Indian in his hand. "Yeah, he's fantastic," said Omri in only a slightly flattish voice. "I haven't got an Indian, a Native American. I know. I haven't got any cowboys either. Nor have I. That's why I couldn't play anything with him." Omri opened his mouth to say, "I won't be able to either." But thinking that might hurt Patrick's feelings, he said nothing, put the Indian in his pocket and forgot about it. After school, there was a family tea and all the excitement of his presents from his parents and his 2 older brothers. He was given his dearest wish, a skateboard, complete with kickboard and kryptonic wheels from his mum and dad, and from his eldest brother, Adiel, a helmet. Gillen, his older brother, hadn't bought him anything because he had no money. His pocket money had been stopped some time ago in connection with a very unfortunate accident involving their father's bicycle. So when Gillen's turn came to give Omri a present, Omri was very surprised when a large parcel was put before him, untidily wrapped in brown paper and string. "What is it?" "Have a look. I found it in the alley." The alley was a narrow passage that ran along the bottom of the garden where the dustbin stood. The 3 boys used to play there sometimes and occasionally found treasures that others, perhaps richer neighbours, had thrown away. So Omri was quite excited as he tore off the paper. Inside was a small white metal cupboard with a mirror in the door, the kind you see over the basin in old-fashioned bathrooms. You might suppose Omri would once again be disappointed because the cupboard was fairly plain and except for a shelf completely empty. But oddly enough, he was very pleased with it. He loved cupboards of any sort because of the fun of keeping things in them. He was not a very tidy boy in general, but he did like arranging things in cupboards and drawers and then opening them later and finding them just as he'd left them. "I do wish it locked," he said. "You might say thank you before you start complaining," said Gillen. "It's got a keyhole," said their mother, "and I've got a whole box full of keys. Why don't you try the smaller ones and see if any of them fit?" Most of the keys were much too big, but there were half a dozen that were about the right size. All but one of them were very ordinary. The unordinary one was the most interesting key in the whole collection. Small with a complicated lock part and a fancy top. A small narrow strip of red satin ribbon was looped through one of its curly openings. Omri saved that key to the last. None of the others fitted, and at last he picked up the curly-topped key and carefully put it in the keyhole on the cupboard door, just below the knob. He did hope very much that it would turn, and regretted wasting his birthday cake cutting wish on something so silly, or rather unlikely, as that he might pass his spelling test the next day, which would take real magic to, being as he hadn't even looked at the words since they'd only been given out 4 days ago. Now he closed his eyes and unwished the test pass and wished instead that this little twisty key would turn Gillen's present into a secret cupboard. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The door wouldn't open. "Hey, Mum, I've found one." "Have you, darling? Which one?" His mother came to look. "Oh, that one? How very odd. That was the key to my grandmother's jukebox that she got from Florence. It was made of red leather and it fell to bits at last, but she kept the key and gave it to me. She was most terribly poor when she died, poor old thing, and kept crying because she had nothing to leave me. So in the end, I said I'd rather have this little key than all the jewels in the world. I threaded it on that bit of ribbon. It was much longer then, and hung it round my neck, and told her I'd always wear it and remember her. And I did for a long time, but then the ribbon broke and I nearly lost it. You could have got a chain for it, said Omri. She looked at him. You're right, she said. I should have done just that, but I didn't. And now it's your cupboard key. Please don't lose it, Omri, will you? Omri put the cupboard on his bedside table and opened it, looking inside thoughtfully. What would he put in it? It's supposed to be for medicine, said Gillen. You could keep your nose drops in it. No, that's just wasting it. Besides, I haven't got any other medicines. Why don't you pop this in? The mother suggested, and opened her hand. It was Patrick's Red Indian, the Native American. I found it when I was putting your trousers in the washing machine. Omri carefully stood the Indian on the shelf. Are you going to shut the door? Asked his mother. Yes, and lock it. He did this, and then kissed his mother, and as she turned the light out, and he lay down on his side looking at the cupboard. He felt very content. Just as he was dropping off to sleep, his eyes snapped open. You thought he heard a little noise, but no, all was quiet. He closed his eyes again. In the morning, there was no doubt about it. The noise actually woke him up. He lay perfectly still in the dawn light, staring at the cupboard, from which was now coming a most extraordinary series of sounds. A pattering, a tapping, a scrabbling, and surely not a high-pitched noise like, well, almost like a tiny voice. To be truthful, Omri was petrified. Who wouldn't be? Undoubtedly there was something alive in that cupboard. At last, he put out his hand and touched it. He pulled very carefully. The door was right shut. But as he pulled, the cupboard moved, just slightly. The noise from inside instantly stopped. He lay still for a long time, wondering. Had he imagined it? The noise did not start again. At last, he cautiously turned the key and opened the cupboard door. The Indian was gone. Omri sat up sharply in bed and peered into the dark corners. Suddenly, he saw him, but he wasn't on the shelf anymore. He was in the bottom of the cupboard, and he wasn't standing upright either. He was crouching in the darkest corner, half hidden by the front of the cupboard, and he was alive. Alive! Omri knew that immediately. To begin with, though, the Indian was trying to keep perfectly still as Omri had kept, lying in bed a moment ago. He was breathing heavily. His bare bronze shoulders rose and fell and were shiny with sweat. The single feather sticking out of the back of his headband quivered as if the Indian were trembling. And as Omri peered closer and his breath fell on the tiny huddled figure, he saw it jump to its feet. Its minute hand made a sudden darting movement towards its belt and came to rest, clutching the handle of a knife smaller than the shaft of a drawing pin. Neither Omri nor the Indian moved for perhaps a minute and a half. They hardly breathed either. They just stared at each other. The Indian's eyes were black and fierce and frightened. His lower lip was drawn down from shining white teeth, so small you could scarcely see them, except when they caught the light. He stood pressed against the inside wall of the cupboard, clutching his knife, rigid with terror but defiant. The first coherent thought that came into Omri's mind as he began to get over the shock was, I must call the others, meaning his parents and brothers. But something, he wasn't sure what, stopped him. Maybe he was afraid that if he took his eyes off the Indian for even a moment, he would vanish or become plastic again. And then, when the others came running, they would all laugh and accuse Omri of making things up. And who would blame anyone for that, for not believing this, unless they saw it with their own eyes? Another reason Omri didn't call anyone was that, if he was not dreaming, and the Indian had really come alive, it was certainly the most marvellous thing that had ever happened to Omri in his entire life, and he wanted to keep it to himself, at least at first. His next thought was that he must somehow get the Indian in his hand. He didn't want to frighten him any further, but he had to touch him. He simply had to. He reached his hand slowly into the cupboard. The Indian gave a fantastic leap into the air. His black pigtail flew and the air ballooned out of his loose-fitting leggings. His knife, raised high above his head, flashed. He gave a shriek, which even though it was a tiny shout to match his body, was nevertheless loud enough to make Henri jump. But not as much as he jumped when the little knife pierced his finger, deeply enough to draw out a drop of blood. Henri stuck his finger in his mouth and sucked it and thought how gigantic he must look to the tiny Indian and how fantastically brave he had been to stab him. The Indian stood there, his feet in moccasins planted apart on the white painted metal floor, his chest heaving, his knife held ready, and his black eyes wild. Henri thought he was magnificent. "I won't hurt you," he said. "I only want to pick you up." So, that's the start of our adventure and our story with Henri and the Red Indian, or should we say the Native American. And if I can just do this once more. Now, Little Bull, our Native American, is from a tribe called the Iroquois. And Iroquois is pronounced Iroquois. And they lived in the area that is now known as New York State. You can see over here, this is the whole of the United States of America. And New York State is just over here. But at the same time, if we spoke about Super Bowl 50 at the very beginning of our time together today, was held in California. And California is one of the biggest states, and it's on the west coast of America here. So my question to you is, before next time, which will now be on Wednesday, what can you find out about the Iroquois tribe? And what can you find out about New York State? And we'll have a look more about the history of the Iroquois, but you can see how the men shaved their heads. And also, this is an illustration of New York State, and the state itself is also broken up into smaller portions as well. So, we have taken our first part together, first step together, first journey together on our Road Trip USA. So questions, if you can find the time, if not, we'll find the time to look at these answers together. What can you find out about the Iroquois tribe, the Native American tribe that were based in New York State? And what can you find out about New York State? Okay? And I look forward to joining you again on Wednesday. So take care, stay safe and alert, and get learning, but most importantly, have lots of fun. Bye.